Good evening and welcome to Colorado Cross Disability Coalition's first Unstoppable Together panel for 2025. We've kept you waiting, huh? Uh, this panel is officially recognized as Unstoppable Together from Legacy to Liberation, honoring the past, shaping the future of disability activism. I am Malik Gooch. I am the communications coordinator for CCDC. And at CCDC, we strive for all Coloradans with disabilities to live full, equitable lives with equal access to any civic, professional, and/or personal opportunities that are available to people without disabilities. We have an amazing panel for you tonight in which we will be hearing stories from these wonderful panelists who will be introducing themselves soon about their stories for advocating for disability rights. So if we can, I would like to start with our guest, October. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm October Santerelli, and I am a Colorado local author as well as a disability advocate. I have been a keynote speaker at several events, and I write about disabled characters, and I post socially about my disabilities. Um, I'm very excited to be here this evening and to get more involved with CCDC and their efforts on activism and making real change, lasting change here in Colorado. Oh, and my
Thank you.
pronouns are he, they.
Thank you, October. Next is a possibly very familiar face. Christina, please.
Thank you. My name is Christina Johnson, and I'm actually one of the founders for CCDC back in the late 80s, 1980s, that is. And I've been a disability advocate most of my life. I was, I think, fortunate to grow in a home where my parents were both activists, but my father was also blind. So I got very familiar with having to advocate at a very young age, watching him do it constantly. I think what's important to me about CCDC is the fact that we were one of the first people in the country to be cross disability. And prior to that, people with disabilities were put in different areas, they were each in a different silo with different funding sources and other kinds of programs. And some of that is logical, but some of that kept us from being a community as well and kept us from feeling our power. So I think by working together and with people that are allies, people that are aging, people that are younger, all of that, we need to embrace.
Thank you, Christina. And might I have to say, I've gotten the chance to meet Christina yearly to bi-yearly, and she has amazing stories and she brings a great energy. Now, alongside that, someone we should all probably give a bit of kudos to and the starter of this very own webinar. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Seyanna Hitt, and I am the Development Director for CCDC. And to what Malik is alluding to here, Unstoppable Together is my brainchild and my baby. When I started with CCDC, I was very curious as a Black woman where the space was for BIPOC folks, queer folks, and folks living at the intersection. Because we know historically access to healthcare and basically to advocacy and into spaces of policy have always been very affluent, and for folks who are not of color or living at a lot of the intersections just because of the way our system shows up and intentionally marginalizes and systemically limits folks who are different, right? And so one of my initiatives when I came into this space as the development director, when I transitioned from being the youth fellow, was to really center voices of folks living at the intersection and also Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks who live with disabilities. We know that disability is the only social identity in which any person can belong to at any point in their life, regardless of all the other social identities that we may identify with. And so I really wanted to create as much of an inclusive space as possible, but also creating a space in which we could really tell our stories. And we know that our stories have meaning and they have impact, and that they are extremely important to continue to tell and to share with those all around us. And so that's why we're here this evening, and I appreciate everybody who is here, and I appreciate the continued support for this initiative. And I hope that this really kicks off the beginning of the year for us in the climate and gives some hope, and we get some rejuvenation, and we start to see some ways to really continue to fight for our liberation as just humans at this point. So thank you all so much for being here this evening. And I apologize for this lighting. The sun is going down and I wanted to be outside. So I look a little weird.
Well, alongside that, if anyone is familiar with previous panels, we always ask very important questions of our panelists. So I want to start by saying I will ask these questions in the order the order of answering would preferably be October, Christina, then Seyanna for all questions, if that's okay with y'all. Okay, and with that, we already kind of alluded to it with both Seyanna and Christina's introductions, but disability activism has had a long and powerful history. I imagine all as advocates, we have had to take away some key lessons from past movements that must be carried forward in today's fight for justice and equity. Do you guys have any comments about that?
Well, I think a lot of what's affecting us currently is classism. We're seeing a lot of classism, and that's another group that we can all belong to at one point or another is lower class, upper class. Fortunes change on a dime, but it's harder for those fortunes to change for the disabled because of limitations on savings accounts and on the ability to keep medical insurance if you are, making too much money in this current system where you'll have to be back on, if you get off Medicaid, you'll spend all your money in that next month if you're disabled and be right back on Medicaid. So I feel like there's a lot of limitations to our financial systems right now for disability people. And I've been running into the issue a lot because of marriage equality stuff overlaps. And I'm like, oh, well, it doesn't matter for me anyway. Uh, can't do it either way. So that one has been kind of important for me recently to bring forward and to keep working on and to really make an effort towards. And I know that there have been proposed expansions of the ABLE account, the ABLE savings account, to include persons under the age of 46 or 48. I can't remember which one. But people in their 40s, that is supposed to have been going into effect on January 1st, 2026. But I don't know what that's looking like in current climate. So that's something I've been watching.
Okay. Christina?
I think one of the things that I've been aware of, I agree with your comments, October, about ageism, about classism. But I think ageism is another thing that we need to face. And for some of that, people that are over a certain age have learned, no doubt, that there is a lot of ageism going around. And it can affect younger people too. It would be like having the attitude of, oh, those young people just want to raise hell and drink beer. It's whenever you group a bunch of people together and try and put down limits and basically make them feel as if what they have to bring to the table isn't valid or important. I think racism is another thing that our community has faced. I think we're making some headway, but I do think we have a long way to go. It's been a very white club for many years, and that needs to change. And the other thing that I think that it's great, and it's a result of the pandemic, is Zoom. People who are in rural communities or who for different reasons can't easily travel depend on Zoom for connections, and it works. We're living proof, I think. Those are the things I think that have affected our community. I think there's also something called burnout that a lot of us have struggled with, and it's real in any kind of social active movement.
Sorry, took a moment
Yeah,
to find the unmute button. Seyanna.
no, you're fine. Thank you so much for both of your answers. I think something that really stands out to me that I appreciate about being a person who lives at the intersection of, you know, being a woman of color, multiracial, queer, taking on a lot of different identities and hats within my community. It's been really nice to live in that privilege, right? A lot of people don't think that folks of color have privilege, or folks who are queer have privilege, or a lot of different social identities that have historically been oppressed have privilege. But I think it's really awesome that I have that privilege to look to my ancestors and to look at people who have come before me in this fight for liberation to learn from. And I think one thing that really stood out that Christina just said is that this beautiful author, Bell Hooks, and kind of sending a message to the Black community that rest is an act of resistance. The system benefits from us burning out. The system benefits from exhausting us. The system benefits from having people throw their hands up and saying, like, I can't do this anymore. And so I think rest is radical, right? Like it should be something we're entitled to, especially as people with disabilities, because of chronic illness, like we're tired. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I'm tired. And so the reality is, though, is that I think that's one thing that we can learn. And also I would like to see moving forward, right? Is that we've seen other movements burn out. We've seen other movements lose their momentum, and we've seen what that cost is, and therefore leading into that space of trusting that, you know, rest can be a form of resistance, I think is one thing that I've learned personally. Another piece that I've learned, I visited the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta last year before last. I can't remember when I went. And it was so interesting because they had an exhibit specifically on the Selma March and Bayard, is it Bayard or Bayard? I think it's Bayard Rustin. And like how he drew out everything, and how he like mapped out the protest and like instructed people like the safe spaces and things like that, and provided instructions of what to do to get in contact with your family if something were to happen and stuff like that. We're still using those tactics to this day. There was a protest today down in Denver at the Capitol for teacher pay cuts. And we're still seeing that mobilization, and we're still seeing all of that happening. So there are some tried and true, you know, acts of resistance that we can lean into. And I think to October and Christina's point about now we have more tools that are available to us to show up in that space, right? Like now we have more digital tools that will allow us to enter spaces that maybe we haven't before. And I think it's really important to take all of that into consideration in seeing how we can better organize and mobilize our disability efforts and the things that we care about for people with disabilities, right? I think it's really important that we lean into that. I think it's important that we lean into the knowledge and the wisdom of the people before us, but also lean into the knowledge and wisdom of the people who are doing the work now and the people who will come after us, because everybody carries wisdom. There's no one size fits all. We all have something to risk. We're all fighting for something. And we need to really lean into our community and the wisdom of the folks in our community to make this change really happen and last.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are plenty of good points. Honestly, I never really thought of rest being a way to advocate and rebel. But from there, we also have the next question being, the Unstoppable Together campaign is about pushing beyond barriers towards full inclusion, my bad, and self-determination. What does true liberation look like for people living with disabilities today, and what steps must we take to get there?
It sounds counterintuitive to say that I want both normalization of and recognition of disability. But that's one of the best ways that we're going to reach this. Christina was talking about ageism and how it does go both ways. And I've seen it a lot in the disability community specifically, where there are people who are too young to be disabled. I have run into that a lot. I got a baby face. I may be older than I look, but I look 22, 23. And I have to take a wheelchair
brag.
through I have to take a wheelchair through Denver International Airport. And every single time there is somebody who comments. Uh, Sometimes it's the chair pusher, sometimes it's a stranger passing by. Every now and again, it's a kid who's like, "Why are they in a chair? I want to roll around in a chair." And their parents like, "I don't know." But there is always some kind of comment where I'm too young, I don't look sick enough because I have an invisible disability. So I believe that one of the true instances of liberation and inclusion would be to both mind your own business and realize that I might be taking a chair because I need it and let it lie like that. Let people sit in seats on buses and don't harass them just because they don't look old enough or disabled enough or whatever. Normalize having access to restaurants, make it super freaking normal the way wearing glasses is normal. Glasses are a disability. Your vision is impaired. You must use corrective devices. That's super normal, though. We don't consider it a disability. I'd like all disabilities to be on the same level of acceptance as glasses.
I think
Okay.
the response to the question would be, to me, full inclusion would be one thing that I would love to see, and we're not there yet. We know that. Another thing I think that's important is for builders to be using universal design, since that's much easier to adapt to somebody who uses a wheelchair or needs other kinds of things put in their living space. Some of you may not remember this, but the way it used to be was people with disabilities, due to pre-existing conditions, couldn't get health insurance. So that kept a lot of us in a trap of poverty, depending on Medicaid. And I think Medicaid is a wonderful service. I'm grateful to be receiving it. And I'm certainly hoping it's something that they don't take away from us with the budget concerns that the state is having. It's a fight right now that everybody needs to get involved with. To me, those are the big ones.
Yeah, I echo a lot of that, and I would add, I wanted to address something here in this space publicly. For a lot of people, I don't know if they noticed, but some people did, and I appreciate the call out. We did not ask if people needed ASL interpretation for this panel. One thing that I am very committed to, as much as I can, same thing with Spanish translation, as much as I can, I want to normalize these things being included in the work that I put out. I can't speak for every event that CCDC does, but if it's something that I put out, I definitely want to normalize that it's going to be included. I don't want to perpetuate this cycle where people have to constantly justify their existence. We shouldn't have to explain why somebody is using a wheelchair to get through DIA. We shouldn't have to justify why somebody needs home modifications done, right? Like, if that is what you need to thrive, that's what you need to thrive. We're not going to tell somebody who had a flat tire that, like, oh, you don't need a flat tire. Like, why do you need why do you need a tire repaired, right? Like, there's things that just need to be normalized, right? And by no means am I comparing the hoops and hurdles that you have to jump through as a person with a disability to the hoops and hurdles that you may have to jump through to get, new tires. But there's just things that we don't do in our society because people are entitled to that. That's a choice that they can make if they need to. And it's something that we don't really condemn people for or make them question their existence or make them feel less than. But as folks with disabilities, It's like we're constantly justifying our existence, right? And then sprinkle in that you're a person of color, sprinkle in that you're queer, sprinkle in that you have an invisible disability, sprinkle in that maybe you do live in poverty because of other circumstances, right? Like we're constantly having to justify our existence regardless of like what identity you're in of oppression, right? So for me, liberation would be if I need to do something to thrive and I am a person with a disability, there should be no questions asked. It should just be normalized. It should be done. Nobody should look at me differently. Nobody should make me feel guilty for it. Nobody should ask me questions. Like I shouldn't have to defend my existence. I say that every time I show up in a social justice space. We should not, as human beings who are entitled to just basic human decency and human rights, right? We should not have to defend our existence. I actually had somebody ask me, because I'm a mom, I have two lovely children. I had somebody ask me, what do you wish children were taught in school about disability? And I was like, that it's normal. Like, I don't know. Like, what more you want me? Like, you want the, like, I would love disability history to be taught and the intersection of how the queer movement, the civil rights movement showed up in that space as well and how they were happening parallel to each other. But at the basic core, that somebody who is different, maybe they're not different. Maybe they're just existing. Actually, not even maybe, they are. They're just human. They're existing. Don't make it weird. That's what I want to teach. Like, don't make it weird. That's what I wish was taught in school, right? Just don't make it weird. October.
If I can jump back in again, because you struck up a key with me there, talking about normalization of accommodations in order to thrive. And one of the things that I've really been working on is neurodivergency acceptance. In the Colorado state government, I've been talking to the heads of state agencies about how to include more normalized accommodations for neurodivergency in the workspace in our government agencies. And it's simple little things like if somebody says, leave me alone for an hour so I can focus, you leave them alone for an hour so they can focus. Um, and and being able to set up their workspace in a way that is conducive to their brain patterns and their productivity patterns. Um, Listening to music in the office if they need to, that sort of thing. All of these things that would seem really, straightforward, have been shocking the offices that I have been talking to. So
Awesome. For our next question, with initiatives like Colorado First Choice and other disability rights advancements, how can policy be used as a tool for empowerment rather than limitation? What role does community organizing play in shaping these policies?
all right, it's me again. I think I am going to have to read this question one more time to get it through my brain. So, the ways policy can be used as a tool for empowerment can really be seen in the ways that age extension on the ABLE accounts has gone through, and in the ways that normalization of services has become more popularized. There was a bill that passed in the Colorado uh, House and Senate that made it an entire office for technological accessibility. The Office of Information and Technology has a new empathy lab digital workshop to teach people how to be more accessible for screen readers and for people who have vision loss or vision impairment, and the ways to access services in rural locations. So there are already some really strong changes policy-wise that are rolling out across all of our government websites through that bill through that measure. And if we keep leaning into, policies that help just expand the world in general, making it so that there is more access to our government sites for rural locations may not seem like it would be super helpful for disability movements, but there are disabled people in rural areas in Colorado who now have access to resources that they didn't. So the cross of all of these different things, the cross of LGBTQ plus bills that have been going and going through committee and being testified against and for and all of that, have concerns to do with healthcare. There has been a couple of transgender bills that made it to committee and did not make it out of committee. We're very glad for this, actually. But they were bills to criminalize access to care for people of certain identities. And the fact that they didn't pass means that there is more access to care, which is good. So things like that, where it may not seem like it would be helpful, but my hormones replacement for my transgender identity helped a lot with the anxiety that causes the stress that exacerbates my chronic illness, and I had fewer flare-ups after I got affirming care. So there is a cross of these policies and legislations. If we keep working for everybody, then everybody is going to benefit.
I'd agree with quite a few of your points, October. I also think, though, that involving people with disabilities in policies and bills is essential. Nothing about us without us. And that wasn't just something that people came up with as a cute little twister. I think it speaks to the fact that we need to be involved in policies at the beginning, not at the end as, window dressing. And I think when that happens, policies are certainly more relevant and more helpful and do something that's positive instead of have a negative effect on people with disabilities. I think historically, that is something that, especially in certain communities, it's just hasn't been explored. And I'm thinking specifically for individuals with IDD, and in many situations, people with mental health or behavioral health issues, I think have experienced not really being included in the beginning, more, as I said, like window dressing. I think other things have happened since we have the ADA, and I think the ADA did an incredible thing, even though we're still here 30 years later, still fighting access in many places, in many situations, especially in rural towns. So there's a long way to go, but I think it can be done.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of the things that October and Christina have said, and my nature, and also my beliefs. So poke the bear a little bit. So I've learned to love and to work within policy, working with CCDC. Prior to coming on to a policy advocacy group, as a person of color, as a woman of color, and as a person with multiple identities that kind of have been forced out of policy on purpose, I really received a lot of messages that there wasn't a seat at the table for folks of color. There wasn't really a seat at the table for folks of intersecting identities. And, obviously, that kind of shapes the way that you approach, policy, right? And if you're willing to work within the system, if you rather like work out of the system, if you hold the belief of dismantling the system and starting anew, all that jazz is really influenced by some of the messages that you receive, depending on which identity, I guess you can say, is the most presenting. And so, yes, I do have a hand amputation, and yes, I was born with my disability, so it's followed me my whole life. However, first and foremost, before people see my amputation, they see me as a woman of color, a Black woman at that. And so I've had to really grapple with this idea of how to use policy as empowerment. I really had to dance with what does it mean to show up in community and encourage community members to work in the space of policy, because I know I'm not the only Black woman of color who feels this way. And I also know that I'm also not the only person with multiple identities who has reluctancy or concerns about what it means to show up in the policy space. Like, it's been intentionally pushed that these like folks like me are not at the table. And so I say all that to say that it is up to organizations like us, meaning CCDC, to create ways and avenues for folks to comfortably show up in these spaces, to pass on the wisdom and the knowledge of how to navigate these spaces, and also to really, as an organization of over 300 coalition members, as an organization that I've even just name dropped and I've seen people shake in their boots, as that organization, it is our plight, it is our burden to bear and our responsibility to open doors and to invite folks at these intersections. Sorry, that's my neighbor's baby. To put people in these seats, right? Like, it's one thing for us to get in the door, but we need to bring people with us. We can't not bring people of multiple identities to the table with us. Like, we have to. It is on our backs to do that. And I take full responsibility for that, you know, coming onto the team with CCDC. Like, I know that. That's why Unstoppable exists, right? Like, policy can be intimidating. Policy can be othering. Policy can be just a whole beast that a lot of people don't want to be involved in. And I'm willing to create avenues and space for folks to show up to. So that's kind of my thing, right? Like, with folks comes community. So
Outstanding. The next question on the itinerary will be: disability justice is deeply connected to other social movements. How can we ensure that our activism remains intersectional, uplifting marginalized voices within the disability community, including people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, and those living in rural areas? Honestly, I feel like we've probably answered these a bit, but let's have a little repeat.
Well, we haven't really talked about connecting with multiple groups yet. I mean, we mentioned that there is a lot of intersectionality, but the way that we keep these voices at the table, the way we uplift these voices more, is by bringing groups together to work together. I do a lot of volunteering with One Colorado, and we recently had a lobby day event at the Capitol building at the start of February. So not so recently, sorry. um, but at this event with 400 people there, they already had a full plan on how to ensure that there were interpretation services for multiple languages, how to make space for people who were with mobility aids or in wheelchairs. They had SSPs for two people who attended who were part of the deaf blind community, and um and they did all of that seamlessly. And the moment I brought up that I had done work with CCDC, they were like, we know them. I work with the Office of Information and Technology on a part-time basis as a consultant for their accessibility efforts on the equality of language. So I connected the CSC, the Community Steering Committee of OIT, to One Colorado, and now they're working on equitable acts or equitable language across all of these websites. And we're trying to find ways to make it so that we can do even more work that way by bringing groups together, by pulling them together through the threads that we are. We can help make change and policy. So I cross a bunch of identities and I will push all of these groups into a room and lock the door if I have to, so that shit stuff gets done.
I just want to say, don't be ashamed for the little oopsie there. One thing, and Christina will get to you, one thing I really want to be honest and transparent about in these spaces, I want it to be as authentic as possible. I think that's something that also folks living at a lot of different oppressed identities tend to do, is be performative and feel like they can't be authentic, that they can't say what they need to say, and they have to kind of code switch or even kind of, you know, minimize a lot of parts of themselves. And that's something that I want to intentionally avoid, because then we're not doing our true work, right? We're not showing up as our true selves. And so how can we talk about empowering the community if we can't even be ourselves, right?
In
So
that case,
yeah.
let's get shit done.
That activism can lead to empowerment, especially for anybody who has felt victimized, whether that's through crime or things through racism, classism, and the other isms. I think in addition to those things, what's important is for people with disabilities to, as I said earlier, come together and really celebrate their authenticity. Two of the groups that I've tried to bring together are people who are aging, elders, and people with disabilities, because there's been some real wide gaps between those two groups. A few years ago, several of us worked on a bill about chronic pain. And one of the things I learned about chronic pain that was interesting was, in general, about 20 to 30% tops of the population deals with chronic severe pain. But when you go to people over age 65, that number jumps up to 70%. I think issues related to pain are something that it has been horribly misunderstood. The DEA and the CDC and groups like that came together in 2016 to create some bylaws around the use of opioids. And yes, opioids have killed people, but usually the people that it's killed have been people who are taking illegal opioids, fentanyl off the street. And the way that happens often is when people with severe chronic pain are cut off by doctors, they often go to the streets because they're wanting relief from pain. It's not that they're bad people or criminals or trying to do anything wrong. They just want simple relief. Pain has killed people. There are people who take their lives because they can't handle the amount of pain that they've been in. And that is truly tragic. And the bill we passed did some good things. It for one thing, it gave doctors and medical providers no ability to be taken in by the DEA or other horrible things that the government has done to intimidate doctors and medical clinics to not carry opioids for people. The other thing that the bill did was it removed a minimum and a maximum as barriers for people with chronic pain, because it's so different. One person may need a lot more medicine than someone else. And again, that's individualized, and we have to have it be individualized. But even without this bill, I'm running into people who are going to doctors who have forced them to taper off at very unsafe levels, and that creates more problems. So that is an example of how I would use that.
Yeah, I think something that we're all kind of dancing around in this, right, is networking, like using our networks and actually using our passion to build our network, and then to connect within our network, and then to also expand our brains and our thought process to be more inclusive, and really normalizing again that folks with disabilities belong to a lot of different identities and have a lot of different passions and have a lot of different needs. And we are more interconnected than we like to think. That's one thing that I'm really learning just for myself, as like I'm taking on this challenge of being a mom, just seeing the commonalities in so many different things in how we show up. And I think in particular, what we need to do as an organization, but as a community, is to really lean in again to the wisdom of our communities in seeing that there's an extension of our community in every, space, right? So that could be rural, that could be urban, that can be inner city, that can be different identities and things like that. And really just putting people who are the leaders in those spaces together, because those are already our trusted people. So I know in my position, as a development director, I really, really, really stress how important it is to lean into the wisdom of whatever community we're trying to support, and, not going in and parentifying, but also really listening to what supports they need and what's identified as, like, a real strain. Because I mean, I love academia. I do. I'm going to get my PhD here shortly. And I recognize that people who show up to research studies usually do it because they want to get paid. And sometimes that's not always representative of the community, right? And that there are some communities that don't want to be researched and studied. And so if we have a trusted community leader, we need to network that, and we need to leverage that, and we need to lean into that wisdom and trust that those community members, regardless of the identity or how they show up, know, right? Like those are that's their people, and they're often trusted. And therefore that's who we need to look to for some guidance. And I think that's how we finally bridge that gap and meet that extension, right? Of getting rural people involved in policy, also hearing like some of the limitations such as accessibility to like internet and things like that, really just hearing those needs and then meeting those needs to again bring people to the table, right? Instead of kind of othering and letting people slide and not be recognized. That's something that I've definitely learned over my time in advocacy. And also too, like I mentioned, I was very anti-policy for a long time, because of just the messages that I received. However, you can't do advocacy without doing policy. Like those two really cannot operate together, because as an advocate in any space, you're always up against the system. There is some system. Maybe it's not necessarily the government or the state level government, like the state level government, not the federal government, but it's even just a system of like navigating Medicaid or navigating the Medicaid website that makes so much sense. Like, like you're always fighting a system. And so leaning into policy with your advocacy kind of go hand in hand, right? Like you have to be able to advocate at the policy level too, to be like, hey, this is not accessible. This does not make sense. This is just outright ridiculous. Like, please stop. So I feel like, we have to kind of utilize that knowledge of policy and advocacy are two things that are kind of parallel to each other, and we can't separate the two.
Okay. And the final question for tonight. What advice do you have for emerging disability activists who want to carry this movement forward? What are the biggest challenges ahead, and how can we stay unstoppable together in the face of resistance?
All right, my top two pieces of advice. One, you have to leave your house. That's my least favorite part of the advice, too. If you want to become more involved with these communities, you have to go get involved with these communities. There are plenty of digital accessible events for all kinds of communities, all kinds of identities. You don't actually have to leave your house, but you do have to at least turn on Zoom. Uh, but getting out of your house and getting into your community and having them physically around you, I have found has been really helpful for my mental health over the past few months, especially because I feel more alone on my own. And then I get out into this group and the energy is really good, and they feed that energy into me. I feed it into them. It's great. It's fantastic. So my first piece of advice is that you have to leave your house. You have to get involved. My second piece of advice for people who want to become more involved in advocacy work is to not be afraid of your voice. Your lived experiences, whatever they are your strongest piece of policy changing. Um, Scientific studies have shown that data does not change minds. Stories do, emotions do. So what you have to say matters a lot more than you might think it does. So say something. Don't be afraid of it. You got this.
That's good advice. Um, I think another thing that I would want to add would be, and you kind of touched on it, is supporting each other. We're doing some pretty serious work that isn't always a lot of fun, and we really need to support each other, because I think that's one way people don't burn out, and it's one way people feel valued and as if they have something to offer, which they do. I think using a sense of humor is important. I also think realizing that you're not going to make a whole lot of friends when you're dealing with an advocacy situation, especially if it's a tense situation. Don't expect to be liked. Don't expect that these people are going to want to maybe have lunch with you. And you might not want to have lunch with them anyway. But irregardless, I do think that when people who bring up a point that is difficult in an agency meeting, it's interesting how the moderator often handles it as an attempt to isolate people from each other and make people feel that their individual stories aren't relevant or important, that they're just a distraction. I also think using creativity in our politics is important. At one point, we had a crawl-in at the Capitol, and this was way back just after the ADA had been passed, and the steps to the anterooms in both the Senate and the House at our Capitol were inaccessible due to steps. We did finally get a ramp put in, but there was a lot of opposition to that. Some people thought a ramp would look ugly or tacky or this or that. And they also put in a lift for the Senate, which facilitates the problem. But again, this was something that the community had to bring to the attention of the press to get changed and to shame, so to speak, the Capitol into following the law and being accessible. They weren't providing amplification for people who were deaf. There was a long list of things that they were doing very poorly. And I think they've come a long ways. It's certainly not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than it used to be.
Yeah, I think I would just add, it sounds really crass, and I think people with disabilities, like, we're used to this, and people living at the intersection, we're used to this, but when you begin to advocate for yourself and you begin advocating for your community, the best advice is get comfortable being uncomfortable. You're going to be in spaces that just feel just right? There's going to be times when you encounter people who are in positions of power that you're just like, oh, you are just not a good human. Like, what is wrong with you? Or you'll hear things that are really, really concerning and uncomfortable, but you have to be in that space to make change. And no, by no means am I saying that you have to accept it, right? But you have to be willing to sit in that discomfort to see, like, why does this make me mad? Why does this provoke something in me? And why do I want to change it? Because knowing your why, just to October's point, that is your story. And that is what facilitates change and sustainable and long acting change. So that's my first piece of advice. And get comfortable being uncomfortable. The next piece, definitely following Christina in this, is get creative. I think that's one thing that I wish I would have received better messaging around when I started my advocacy journey in the space of disability. My background has always been domestic violence and sexual violence, prevention and education work there. But when I stepped into the space of disability, I didn't realize that, and this, I do not hold any shame in saying this, because it was me being naive as a person who was born with their disability, I never realized how creative I've had to be to thrive in this world. I never realized the lengths that I've had to go through with like trying to make things where I could open them because of my hand amputation, and things like that. I just never really paid attention to it because it's like I just have to do it. I just have to do it to live. And so leaning into that space of creativity and extending that beyond just, you know, being able to do basic life skills, my advocacy doesn't have to look like going down to the Capitol and protesting all the time. I can do things like this. I can use my art expression as an act of resistance. I can be an organizer for resistance. There's so many different ways that you can show up to this movement or any social justice movement, really. It's not a one size fits all, and there's not really just like one formula of how you have to do it. And I think that's something that's really good and unique about our community. We have to adapt to live in a world that isn't really built for us. And therefore, inherently, we are very creative people. And so our advocacy can be creative as well. So I would say get comfortable being uncomfortable and lean into your creativity, that you just already innately have.
I also think a lot of people with disabilities have internalized messages from whether it's the system, friends, parents, the community of you don't matter, your story isn't relevant, go away. And I think that has changed. I think most people with disabilities are past feeling ashamed or feeling like they have to apologize due to their disability. And that's huge. We have a long ways to go in that field, but I think it's being done, and that's the exciting thing.
With that, that is our last question for the night. But since we still have some time, we are going to run a quick question and answer section. If you would like, we would like to invite our audience to ask our panelists a few questions by using the chat feature to submit your questions, and we'll try to answer them the best we can.
And while people are typing their questions, can I just ask, how do people get more involved with CCDC moving forward?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different opportunities. So obviously we have our big events throughout the year. So our annual ADA Awards, which will be July 25th. If you are interested, follow us on Facebook for how to purchase tickets for that. We also will have a Beats and Barbecue fundraiser as well. That is really community centric. I am so excited about this. We're looking for community partners, and we're going to have a local band, Latin Soul, playing. So I'm super excited for that. We also have the opportunity for people to volunteer with us. We're always looking for folks to assist with testifying. We also have some like resource mobilization type things that we need. We have a lot of different opportunities for people to volunteer and participate with us. So if you are interested, you can follow us on Facebook. You can join our member alert through ccdconline.org. You can sign up for our newsletter and just know all things CCDC.
Like to add, in addition to that, the youth program, which you worked for at one point, Seyanna, and
Yes.
at one point did long time ago. And it's a really exciting program because it teaches youth basically to, again, have pride about their disability rather than shame. It connects them to a tribe. It brings them into the community, and hopefully they stay there.
Yeah, for sure. Again, my big initiatives are connection and community, and really trying to bring people together to show up authentically for themselves, and also recognizing that everybody's disability journey looks different. I think I've like coined that here at CCDC now, calling it a disability journey. You know, we just show up differently, right? And that's okay, like wherever you're at in that. And also too, like I said, making policy seem less scary, I think is really important as well. And just advocacy in general, and letting people know that the way you show up is the way you show up, and there's no right or wrong way. If it's meaningful and impactful to you, meaningful and impactful to you. So, But if we don't have any questions, I just want to say thank you all for participating in the first panel for 2025, and I hope you all stay around and continue. Oh wait, we do have a question. Can we share more about the coalitions with other social justice movements we're part? Oh yes. So we are working with the Denver Basic Income Project. We work with Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Obviously we partner with pretty much all of the disability related organizations, so like the ARCs. We also work with PASCO. We work with oh yeah, there's so many acronyms. Why does Colorado do so many acronyms, guys? Let's talk about that. Like everything is Colorado this, Colorado that. So we partner with a lot of different disability related organizations. We work with Craig Hospital, we work with Rocky Mountain Health Plans. We work with Colorado Access. We work with some other like law law firms. Wow, that's laws are not an organization. Law firms, and yeah, we're just really, really deep in the community as far as who we work with. Like I said, we're a coalition of over 300. So yeah, if you want a more in-depth list, I can definitely connect you with our community outreach coordinator. She keeps a running list of that, and I know that we're continuously adding more to what that looks like. And we have some questions about the work that we're doing around for the community of IDD folks. So we're trying, to October's point, CCDC is trying to normalize just the way that we talk about anything neurodivergence and like development and stuff like that. Historically, I know that there have been silos around the different disability types, and what we're really trying to do with CCDC is integrate that because we know that they all show up, one way or another, and they're interconnected, and a lot of people need support in that space. So what we can do is we can put out some more information publicly just around what we're doing with that community in particular. I know that we have some really unique opportunities coming up, hopefully, with helping with entrepreneurship for folks who have disabilities. And specifically, we know that people with IDD lean into that space of entrepreneurship and, really being self-reliant in that way with their creativity. So I will definitely make sure that we put that information out there so that we keep everybody updated. Hopefully that answers everybody's questions. I feel like we just have so much all the time going on. So it's hard to keep track. Any other questions really quickly? I want to respect everybody's time and I want to respect our panelists' time. But also I'll put my email in the chat if there's anything that anybody would like to follow up with directly, or if you want information, please feel free to email me. I am the development director and I can put you all in contact with, I'll also put our community engagement coordinator, her information in here as well if you're interested in like volunteering or just being more connected. Yes, in El Grupo Vida, we work with Jose, who's on the call here, amazing connection there for the Latinx community. Yeah, we work with CEDU, so the Disability Opportunity Fund Office. So yeah, in the chat, you have my email, which is the sdhit@ccdconline.org. And then our community engagement coordinator, which is dhoward@ccdconline.org. That's Dawn. She's our community engagement coordinator. Also can answer questions around community partnerships and the work that we're doing. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, giving up your Thursday evening. I hope this has been inspiring. I hope it's kind of given some hope around the possibility for change and our collective liberation. And yeah, I hope to see you all at our next panel next month. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
And just in case, for anyone who wants more follow-ups or news about any of the upcoming panels or other events that CCDC has planned, we have our Facebook under the same name as our organization, Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. And we do provide newsletters such as a legislative minute, which covers all things that happened during and interpretations of what was happening for legislative decisions, but also provide updates such as community resources and news updates, like I said, about any future events held by CCDC. Like Seyanna said, we would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you, October. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Seyanna, as well, for participating with us. And we hope everyone has a great evening.